15, 16 years old is young to be thinking at such a high level about the future and thinking almost of other people in an unselfish way.
We live in a fantastic period in history of the Earth. Those amazing, stable conditions for mankind to thrive, that's actually what we're messing with.
Jasper Steinhausen, the leading sustainability consultant in the Nordics, best-selling author and advisor to governments, royalty, and some of the largest companies in the world.
If we don't do anything, what happens?
It will mean collapse of... The key thing here is always to think about what could we do to start changing core of what it is we do.
Why planting a tree is bad etiquette for your company.
That is because sustainability could be used to solve a lot of existing business-related problems.
Creating curiosity around how we can improve our businesses without adding costs to help a wider mission or to create a better planet for future generations. Do you think most of the world are naive to the impact of climate change?
The less you have of contact to something, whatever that is, the less you understand it.
I've got a quick favour to ask you. Nearly 90% of people listening to this podcast right now don't follow or subscribe to us. And my goal is to get that down to 80%. So if you've ever liked an episode or a clip that we've put out, please could you click that follow or subscribe button. It helps us more than you know to bring more guests onto the podcast and put out better and better content for you. Thank you. Before we dive into this episode, I want to take a second to speak about our sponsor, Pith Stem, who we are thrilled to have on this journey with us. As someone who is always looking for ways to improve my healthy hustle, Pith Stem's DropTop desk stood out to me as the best full work-from-home solution on the market. The world of work from home is changing, and a laptop or screen perched on your lap or dining room table isn't enough anymore. It's imperative that we have a solution at home that matches our productivity station that we can have in our office. But of course, homes weren't made to be worked in, and not all of us want a dedicated study. That's why I'm so happy that Pith Stem created this perfect solution. They designed this desk with both the needs of the professional and their home in mind. It's perfect because it allows me to have a full productivity station that suits my needs and helps me get the most out of every minute that I spend at it, not only so I work comfortably, but that I actually enjoy it. And the best thing about DropTop, I can close and lock it at the end of the day to keep work and home separate. And it looks awesome on the wall. You can get your DropTop desk anywhere in the world from pithandstem.com or just Google DropTop and you'll find it pretty quickly. Now, let's get on to today's guest. Jasper, hvordan har du det?
Tak Freddy. Jeg har det rigtig godt.
I want to take you back to one of your last years at school. So you're around 15, 16 at gymnasium, or in the UK we would call that sixth form. And I want to talk to you about that lesson that changed your life. And I've heard you talk about it before, but I want to hear from you why that lesson changed your life and then led you down the path of what you do today.
Well, it's interesting, right? You have these, when you think back and you can kind of recall where this was kind of like something flipped the switch. So the lesson here is on climate change. And Tom, my teacher there in geography, he tells us the story that's the one that sort of stuck with me, is that when the ice on the Greenland ice sheet starts to melt, it means a lot of fresh water leads into the ocean, and that changed the structure and the salinity of the water, and that's actually the driving force in what's called one of these sort of major pumps. Also, you can think of it like a global conveyor belt of energy and nutrients and warm and cold water, and that's what drives the Gulf Stream that brings the warm water to Scandinavia and the UK, and you could just say kind of like the irony is that increasing temperature and climate could lead to a spread of the Arctic climate that we know from up north all the way down across Scandinavia in the case of the Gulf Stream actually, if it stops. By now we know that it is absolutely being disrupted and we are seeing changes in it. So we are heading into unknown territory here. But anyway, for me in that sort of young man's brain, I was kind of thinking, okay, is this the magnitude of the experiment that we are doing, right, as mankind? And that sort of equally, I guess, got me really curious and also kind of like, what's going on here? I need to engage in this. I need to understand more. So that really sort of was a starting point for it. And that led me to when I went on to university to do a master's in this environmental space, and basically been working within this field ever since.
But what was it in that class, right? Because I remember like geography when I was a similar age, and I remember everything was amazing. You're talking about the planet, and then you're talking about what could go wrong, and if the average temperature of the Earth goes up by this city will flood. Do you remember the things in that lesson specifically that made you go, "This is something that I need to do, that I need to work on"? Was it a scary fact? Not necessarily asking for the fact, but was it a scare tactic, or was it a endearing tactic?
I mean, to some extent, and I think especially this part about the magnitude, right? If you imagine that we see a climate that we have on Greenland today, all the way across Scandinavia, right? That would massively change everything. Only just everything. Right? Living conditions for all creatures, economy, everything will be completely different. I'm kind of thinking, if that's it, I think it's really the scale that stuck with me, that this is not a matter of minute changes here and there, or a couple of species that will be hard pressed, or it's really that the life conditions for mankind and for animals, that's what we are gambling with here. That's what we are playing around with, right? So it's no small scale thing. This is, I mean, we hear today obviously a lot that people say, not a lot act on it, but a lot of people say that climate change is mankind's, this current place in time. This is our biggest challenge. This is what we have to rise to, right? And it is by length what we need to have to rise to it. Climate change and also biodiversity, but that also sustainability space, right? So I think it was like early understanding of the magnitude, meaning that it was just, again, as I said, equally scary and equally curious to understand more and to see. I think I come out of an upbringing with a focus on making an impact and making a difference, and I actually started more on the social side, so to speak, of sustainability from as far back as I can remember, actually having an interest in that, reading papers on from very early and engaging in youth politics and everything. So having opinions on stuff and, discussions around dinner table on politics. And, so I sort of been brought up in a political interesting family where, you engage, you do things. That's kind of what I've been seeing all my life, my parents doing. So I think it was natural for me also looking for what kind of impact and engagement, where do I want to, where am I going to throw myself in? And as I said, coming out of that social space in those years, I was kind of shifting a bit. I can't remember why, but I think I was sort of getting that feel for that sort of environmental part of sustainability. And then this was really a defining thing for me that, okay, I need to look more into this. And then, things just got deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, but exactly. That's really interesting, though, that you were almost more susceptible at a young age. 15 to 16 years old is young to be thinking at such a high level about the future and thinking almost of other people in an unselfish way. I think that's really interesting in itself. So what was it in your family or your upbringing with what your parents did for roles or around the dinner table that you would talk about that you think helped open your mind to think bigger and for other people? Because that's quite interesting as a point, I think.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that it's just always been like that in the family, that, also in sort of the wider family and friends of the family, that, we help each other. If somebody needs help with something, we show up and help, right? That's always what it's been like, Everything from something breaks down or so people need to refurbish or people are moving or, whatever it is. If there is an issue around it, we just tend to sort of stick together and help each other out, right? And I've seen that all my life, right? And I remember my father has always been talking about, that, one favors the other. So, you go out and help and, so it just comes around, goes around, right? So I think that's just been a natural thing. It's the only thing I've seen, I guess you could say. So that was how most of people around me, and especially family and friends for family, they acted. So it was kind of naturally that obviously you engage, and again, having all those discussions and interest in that. I guess just sort of, I've never questioned that I would work on doing something that was more than about myself. Also, way before I, knew or considered anything about running a business or anything. That was just like, I think that's just been me all my life. I've never really questioned that was meaningful. And I think it was about finding my niche. Where do I fit in? Rather than, should I do something that's not about me, but about something else, about society, about making an impact. I think that was just obviously.
Yeah.
What else?
Which is actually, that's remarkable though, because I think, especially in young people today, there's not a lot that people look at and go, I want to help the wider audience. In terms of percentages, I would have thought if you look at the data, not many people go, I'm going to work on a bigger crusade, a bigger thing. Most people are focused on their inner circle or maybe just their own mission. But it feels like you have picked a bigger mission or a bigger crusade from the outset, which is why you are able to help in this amazing way now. I'm interested to hear how you think living in Denmark. So for the listeners now, we're actually shooting this in CoHo studios in Copenhagen. And I think that's really interesting. So we've been here a week or so, and I'd love to hear from you how you think living in Denmark, growing up in Denmark, impacted the way that you look on the world. Because especially with climate change, sustainability, it feels like here is the epitome or the cutting edge of technology in terms of making changes and actually going towards building a better future. And I wonder if that impacted you growing up and in your work now.
Yeah. Well, I think we obviously have sort of if you look at what sort of the hygiene level of understanding around sustainability, quote unquote, whatever that is, for people, there's no doubt that we have a fairly high level. There's definitely also other cities and countries in the world that are also higher, but the level of consciousness is probably in the higher end on a global scale. So I think that's one part. And then, I mean, I've always had outdoors as part of my life, right? Fortunate enough to grow up in an area where, it was like 200, 300 meters to the forest, and from a pretty young age, as soon as sort of my circles got bigger than the road that where I played around with my friends, we was kind of, okay, what's happened next? What's next?
Yeah.
One of those what's next, was the forest and the seaside, right? So I think from a very young age, I've been playing around there, taking my bike or any type of whatever could roll out and ride out there. And so just always been part of that. So I guess sort of that sort of connection to living things is an integrated part of me as well.
Do you think most of the world are naive to the impact of climate change because they don't have the accessibility that you did to the climate or to the environment around you?
I definitely think that you're onto something, that the less you have of contact to something, whatever that is, the less you understand it and less you connect to it, right? So if you live in a huge city somewhere in the world and never really ever have contact with real nature, then obviously you're a bit of a stranger to it. That's something you see on BBC, right?
Yeah.
But if you actually live it, then I'm assuming that obviously you have a better connection to it. So I definitely think it helps to the willingness or the ability to value nature. Probably has, but I don't have sort of scientific background to say that, but has a correlation with how much time you spend there, right?
And you've also spent 20 plus years competing in things like mountain biking and biking in general, right? For those listening, Jasper's come in today, and the calves on this guy, he clearly is a very, very successful cyclist. And I think in Denmark, or in general, maybe in Europe, maybe it's just a generalization, there's a lot of worth put on outdoor activity, especially here when the air is so clean and you can get out onto the open roads. We're in the centre of Copenhagen now. You can get out now and it's not that busy outside in the middle of the day. I mean, you would notice a difference if pollution started to rise, or if, stuff started to happen in the climate that was really affecting you. And I guess what I'm saying is that you've already got such high standards as a country and as a city, as a metropolis, that I wonder if that is something that as a community of people you want to uphold, and that becomes part of you, part of your core, part of your history. And then you start to notice, because obviously you're really close proximity to all the Nordic countries, but also all the wildlife in the oceans. You've got some of the cleanest oceans in the world. Do you think that almost creates that almost a mob mentality of we need to look after our archipelago, and then wider than that becomes we should look after the world, and that's why you feel so passionate, and there are so many passionate people here about.
I mean, there's I don't know, right? Because so I don't really have the background to say that whether or not that's sort of right, but I think there's definitely something that makes sense, at least I would say, that a lot of people have that sort of just that's more like, again, you could say, what's the normal? Everybody has a normal around you, right? Whatever that is, and we tend to sort of preserve and work around that normal. And if that normal is fairly high, well, then that's what we have our plus and minus around. Whereas if it's very, very low, if you're in a very environmentally congested part of the world, then that's your starting point, and that's what everything is compared to, and also what you might wish to change for the better, but it's still from that starting point, right? So you might say that, if you look at a city like Beijing, for instance, that I know has had huge congestion problems, but are also moving to become slightly better, and there's a lot of demand from it. I know from discussions from a friend who's lived there. But again, I would probably say by the time they're happy, if you dump me in that area, I would probably feel like, okay, this is significantly congested area, right? So that's sort of what's your reference point, right? And so I think you're right. If you're brought up in an area where the reference point is a fairly pristine and nice environment, then that's your reference. And
I think that's a really key point to what this conversation's gone so far. And this is why I wanted to touch on these sort of areas, because you're completely right that what is your zero? What is your baseline?
Yeah.
If I was from Copenhagen or from Denmark, I think I would want to protect the planet probably more than I currently do being from England, living in Dubai. And the only reason I say that is because the standard is so high here in terms of awareness, probably awareness, but also then action taking. So even here, for example, if you want to recycle a can, you get paid to recycle a can, right? There's pant on everything and you go back and you recycle it. To me, that's a no-brainer. Why wouldn't we do that? Such a good way to look after the world. You've also got that incredible recycling plant. The only way I know it is Copenhagen Hill. It's got the ski slope on top. But it's incredible at recycling waste. And that's my point. That's my interest, I think, is like, why are we so passionate about the climate here? Because I've always been passionate about climate change and sustainability and corporate social responsibility since as soon as I started university. Those were always the classes that I wanted to take in sort of the economics route, because I think there's a lot that can be said for looking after the planet and also helping your business, which is why I'm so interested to talk to you, because my philosophy is slightly different to yours. And actually, I think yours is better. I think the way that your approach, your methodology in your book, which is on the table here, is actually a better way than I would have thought about it before. So before we touch on that, I want to go deeper into your story.
Okay.
Because I really want to understand not only why we're interested in climate change, but why we're interested in a mission, a crusade, a wider reason. And I want to touch on your father's accident. So your father had an accident which then made you look at business and money differently, made you want to understand the wider meaning of life and what we actually should be doing with our limited and fragile time. What happened on that day?
Well, we are back at December 15, 2009, and it's snowy. And my father is out to cut down a tree probably for a friend or a friend of a friend, coming back to what we talked about earlier on. Definitely something he's doing after work hours as a way to help. And he always did lots of small things on the side. So whether or not I can't remember if it sort of was a job he was doing for somebody, but it was definitely for somebody he knew or in the network, right? But anyway, Not 100% certain exactly what happens because nobody saw it, but how we could structure it is just that anyway, something went wrong. He's done hundreds of those before. But he ends up getting knocked down from up there. He stands, I don't know, 4 meters perhaps above ground and end up landing on the pavement on his back. So he basically gets severe head trauma both on the front and on the back. 4 brain surgeries later, so a pretty intense Christmas, I would say, and New Year's. But about a month later or so, he actually emerges from sort of a post or sort of that semi-coma stage and starts recovery. Actually, slightly later than doctors say normally you have a chance if you don't sort of escalate out of that semi-coma phase within 28 days. They say normally they don't. So they were starting to tell us you probably shouldn't expect that it gets a whole lot better than this. But then miraculously he did and started to recover. And then it's been a very, very long recovery phase. But I think it sort of underpinned because, the whole family came together around how do we deal with this and how do we support him and everything that needs to take place around this, and really sort of dividing out who's best at this, and in a day or so we sort of organized ourselves around how do we do this, how do we shield him from also his huge network of people, because you don't need a ton of people around you when you have severe head trauma and trying to recover for that. Right? But on the other hand, we also want them to know and, all of that. And so I took care of connections to the work and the municipality and all of that sort of part. My sister, who's a nurse, took care of obviously all connections to the medical side and better at understanding what they tell us and asking the questions and all of that. So we sort of divided between a small group of us. But I think it's just, there's a lot of sort of learnings that when you look back, what did I, it's one of those things that would you desire to happen in your life? Absolutely not. But when you look back, would you have been without it? Well, no, actually not, because it has taught us all so much. And I think one of the things that I, looking back, can see that it taught me is both that, when you pull together, you can do incredible stuff. You can manage to find your way through crisis and get back up on your feet and do the most incredible things, basically. So that's one of the things that I also, take with me into life, but also a precious, a reminder of how precious life is. And, I remember I was taking the bus with we only had 2 kids at that time, to go for swim training. And the phone call just as the bus comes up, and it's my mother, and I says, "Oh, can I call you back in 2 seconds? I just need to board and tickets and all that stuff," and then call back. So it's just an ordinary afternoon, right? And then she tells, right, this is what happened, and we don't know really what's going on, and he's currently here, and okay, all right, what do we do? And think, how do we rethink all of this? So it comes out of nowhere. You never really know, right? Nobody knows. How long time do we have here, or what's the conditions of our life? So I think that's sort of, I love life and everything it has to offer. I think most people do. I also know, at least, that some people sometimes forget to remind themselves of how precious and amazing life is. But if you do that, and the more you actually spend time enjoying it and valuing it, the more it's also obviously that you got to make sure that you get the most out of it, and that you for people around you, that you could do something to make sure that the conditions are there for people to get the most out of it, right? I think that's also where it connects into that broader picture around that it's, if I have 3 kids now, I would love them to experience something like I did. But also the kids of the world, friends, family, everything around me,
I just want to briefly interrupt this podcast so I can talk to you about Nutrition Kitchen, who have kindly sponsored this episode. As entrepreneurs who are looking to stay as healthy as possible, fueling ourselves with high quality food without breaking the bank or wasting time can be tough day to day. Nutrition Kitchen solves that issue by delivering incredible meals to your door, tailored to your diet, whether you're trying to lose weight, build muscle, or maintain balance. They change their menus all the time so you can choose from a variety of dishes and leave the monotony of meal prepping behind. Now, back to our guest.
We live in a fantastic period in history of the Earth, right? The last 10,000 years have been super stable, right? If you look at development in species, and if we just take ourselves as mankind as we tend to see as the most important, if we look at that, the absolute majority of our sort of development and thriving on the planet has happened in the last 10,000 years because we've had extreme stability and very, very, very nice conditions for our species in terms of temperature and all of that. And that's what we are messing with right now, right? So to take it back to the climate change, right? Those amazing stable conditions for mankind to thrive, that's actually what we are messing with, right? And if you ever doubt it, just think back to last time you either experienced or know somebody who experienced a radical weather event, right? You could just go back a month or two or whatever, where you had the biggest rainfall in, I don't know, 75 years, right? And storm and everything that you're not used to seeing. And we all know either we experience it ourselves or we know somebody, a link or two away that all of a sudden were caught in something, whether it's being extremely hot or extremely cold or windy or wet or dry or whatever it is, right? So it gets harder and harder to ignore the fact that it kind of resembles what I heard some tree hugger crazy person talking about on and off for the last 4 decades, right? Mm. But we are living that reality that people have been talking about was around the corner with the consequences, and we're just at the very early part of the uptake. If you look at this as an exponential curve, right? We are there at the very beginning of the change, and we have, well, I would say most people have no idea what we're in for. In general, we probably don't. But we do have quite a lot. And the scary thing is that if you look at all the models that I've been doing, even the ones that are fairly sort of primitive back in the early 90s, and you look at those data and then you fit it with the actual development, we are extremely well fitted to the worst case scenario.
Okay, so if we don't do anything, what happens?
Well, we're looking into something like perhaps a 4-degree increase in global mean temperature, which might, in most cases, people might think, oh, how bad can that be, right? But that's the mean temperature, and it will mean collapse of several types of fish stocks and plant stocks, and lots of parts of ecosystems won't function. We probably see a massive disruption. I mean, if you look, coming back to my opening story about the Gulf Stream, massive disruption to that. We will see 10, 50, 20 meter sea rise. I mean, we're talking radically change of the conditions for mankind to live in. And on the back of that, and way before we reach those positions, we'll see bigger and bigger areas on this planet that basically will be inhabitable. You cannot live here because it doesn't rain, or it's so hot, or it's so wet, or it's flooded, or whatever, right? So if you think that the migration problems that we have in the world right now are really, really big and almost impossible to tackle, then I'll just say, well, we need to find a way to do this, because that's going to be like a daycare trip, right? Because we are talking hundreds of millions of people that will have to relocate simply because you cannot live where you live today. So we're going to see, just extremely more, unfortunately, probably also violent conflicts because of people living in areas where you can't really live, or it's really, really hard to live, and it's going to impact economies and everything. So
one of the things I think is interesting.
So that's sort of that's the dark outlook
This is what I wanna
that we
touch on,
want
though.
that we would like not to hit, right?
Exactly. I remember when I had, I think I was in probably 16, 17, we had a geography lesson and we were talking about climate change and in 10 or 15 years' time, this is going to happen. And it didn't happen. And in 25 years, this might happen. Might not happen. My point is that are we at risk of scaremongering people too far into this is going to happen? And then we get to that point, nothing's happened. A good example is the electric cars. So in the UK, we're all going to go electric by 2030. Well, they've moved that back. What I'm saying is if we're scaremongering people too much and then nothing actually happens or nothing that they can tangibly see that affects their immediate life, they take it less and less seriously. So as the curve goes up in terms of the devastation that we may see, people's interest goes down. How do we manage that?
For me, this is really a nice segue into the reason why, I mean, I think just about everybody talks about this the wrong way and understands this, and they're completely missing the massive opportunity there is here, right? Because it's like people feel that right now, this is the optimum of mankind's position on Earth, right? So if we change anything, it means it will be worse. Right? People always see this, right? And we talk about, that if you to do anything, if politicians come up with something, or if business leaders, whatever it is, come out with a suggestion or an idea, a lot of people's kind of like, oh, no, I don't want to give up this. I don't want to give up that. Right? So I am so confident and happy that I know this is not peak mankind. Right? If you look around, could you just point out a handful of things in this world that you don't think is ideal? I think it's pretty easy, right? There are loads of them, right? They're stacked on top of each other. So why the heck do we think that we cannot change and we shouldn't change anything? And here is something that profoundly disrupts many layers of society and business. So it's a golden opportunity to make the best out of something we have to deal with anyway, right? So this is the massive innovation platform to take a leapfrog of the way we deliver our businesses, our services as a business, or run our societies, or deal with some of these endless stack of issues that we have, to elevate ourselves to a higher and better place. But nobody talks about it like that, right? And on the top of that, we always focus on this in a way, we communicate around this in a way that makes everything harder for us. It's kind of I remember when I realized that, it was kind of like really one of these eureka moments, like, why haven't I thought about this before, right? Because how do we talk about this? Well, it's marinated in guilt, right? It's reduce, avoid, stop doing, don't fly, don't eat, don't consume, don't do this, don't do that, give up on this, reduce on this, right? That's how just about everything is communicated. And very often, the targets, it's about reducing, avoiding, or ideally, zero waste, zero carbon, zero whatever it is, right? But look at that from a business perspective. How much energy is there in zero? Zero, right? How many business people do you know feel like, we are setting plans for this year. Our target is going to be zero. Nobody, right? So the language of business is about more, right? Higher turnover, more turnover, more profits, more clients, more employees, more something. But what's the language of sustainability? Reduce, avoid, stop doing, less of. And then you wonder if you imagine you're here, we're sitting at the C-suite having a discussion, and we know we need to do something on sustainability. And then you figure, okay, I'll go down and talk to the guys in sustainability, or a consultant, or whatever, depending on your size of company. And then all you hear is stop, reduce, avoid. And then you feel like, we can't be on the same team, right? So something's wrong here. Everything, I get up in the morning to do more, you get up in the morning to do less. Should I take business advice from you? I don't think so, right? Something is wrong here. So the way we frame everything in the sustainability community completely makes everything harder. It gets harder to get, to get people to join in. And it's actually even worse, because in the old part of the brain, you have the sender that controls. I know it's not a sender, but anyway, let's talk about it like that. That controls your feeling of scarcity, right? And every time somebody's about to take something away from you, or every time somebody tells you that you have very limited time to make up your mind because otherwise this is going to be disappearing for you, this opportunity, whatever that is, even if it's something as stupid as looking at a pair of shoes, you haven't perhaps even made up your mind yet. But then because it says it's only 2 pairs left, right? Then you say, okay, I should grab them, right?
Yeah.
So the second something is about to be taken away from you, you hold on to it for dear life, which makes completely sense if you go back hundreds of years, thousands of years, because it might mean you starve tomorrow. But not today, obviously, but as you know, the brain evolves so slowly. So whenever we communicate this around reducing, avoiding, having to let go of, instantly the own brain says, nope.
It's argument bias, isn't it?
It is.
In an argument, you always think you're right. Even if you know you're wrong, over time in a debate, you start to go, no, I'm right. I have to be right. What I really like about what you're saying, Jasper, is that a lot of what we try and do is really think differently. First principles thinking, knock everything back down and build it up again. And I think that's what you're doing. The way you speak about sustainability reminds me of the way that the AI community are speaking about AI. If you don't do this now in this way, you're missing out on an opportunity, not you're going to be completely left behind. No. Maybe you would be in sustainability as well as AI, but reframe it, reposition it. I'm happy to be vulnerable here because we've spoken about this before. In our company, whenever we make a transaction, whenever someone buys from us or we plant a tree. That's the thing we do. And I think that's really cool. That's what I thought was in a really good way of giving something back every time we make a transaction, as a, in addition to charitable donations and volunteering or whatever. But when we spoke to you about it, you made me look at it the other way because I'm actually taking away from myself. Yes, I'm giving, but actually I'm adding cost to the bottom line of the company. But the way that you frame it is that sustainability should be growing, adding more, just like your marketing spend, just like your team KPIs. I really want to talk to you about why planting a tree is bad etiquette for your company as a solution to your CSR or your sustainability goals.
Yes. Well, and that is because sustainability could be used to solve a lot of existing business-related problems. Stuff that is on most leaders' plate, like how do we cut cost? How do we increase customer loyalty? How do we attract the best people? How do we increase innovation? How do we increase productivity? How do we get better partners? And especially here in Europe very soon, how do we attract capital? Because at least here, there's a growing demand for the finance sector to report and have a say on your level of sustainability in your portfolio and so on and so on. So, problems that, take any company and ask the C-suite for what's on top of their mind, and they will tick one or more all of these boxes, right? But most are just not aware that you can utilize sustainability as a tool to solve these problems. And obviously not because it's never been part of their curriculum or their responsibility. And again, as I said before, if you talk to people within sustainability domain, on the flip side, they have never had anything about business strategy or leadership. So nobody really knows, but they're looking at the same things, but with completely different tribal languages and understanding. And they're completely missing the picture, right? That we actually can utilize this. So again, becoming a force for good company or whatever you want to frame it can help you solve a lot of these problems while leaving the world in a better state. So I always say, start and end with business, right? Or create business with embedded environmental impact or social impact, if that's your thing, rather than the other way around. So long sort of detour, but back to your trees, right? When you plant a tree, you are not solving or contributing to solving a meaningful problem that you have in your business or your clients. You have a feel-good thing, but you're just adding a cost structure, right? And it's what I always help people do is really figure out. So one of the key questions I ask a business leader when I sit down very, very early on in the conversation is, okay, so what's your top 5 business problems? Not sustainable problems, sustainability-related problems, but business problems. Sometimes one or more of them are related to it. It could be, but it doesn't have to. And what's your ideal client's top 5? Okay, so let's look at that and let's say this is our filter, right? And then the second they start talking about it, I can already see what parts of sustainability and circular economy and all the sort of tools you can have on the back of that would fit nicely with this, right? Because where do we find solutions to these problems, right? But what most people do is they feel like, okay, I need to do something, but I'm afraid and I don't really understand how to do this and how to connect it to my business. And I don't want to rock the boat, so what do? And then somebody comes along and say, well, you could plant a tree for every time somebody buys a product, whatever that is. And you feel like, oh, great, I'm off the hook now. I'm doing something. It feels good. It makes sense. Oh, yeah, it cost a little bit, but it's not too much. I can live with it. But for somebody else, it might not be plant a tree. It might be plant 10,000 trees, or it might be doing something completely different. It has nothing to do with trees, but it's still not something that's related to the business. So it just means that we add cost to it, which, coming back to what I said before, just emphasizes this feeling that whenever we work with sustainability, it's a cost thing. It's not something that adds value. And if it does, most business leaders can get to the point where they see, well, there could be a brand value, but then they're also scared to death
Definitely.
of greenwashing accused. And so how do we dare saying it, right? So the one big business value they can see right away, they're really afraid of utilizing. And then it's kind of like back to square one, right? So it is just a cost center. So they're completely missing the opportunity to rethink and to utilize this as a way to solve meaningful business problems at the same time as you create an impact, which means that you get far more implementation power because now you want to make sure you implement this to the best you possibly can because we are solving something that we've been trying to solve for a long period of time. So obviously we want to implement this, right? And that means you also get more impact. So whether you look at it from an impact point of view or from a I just want to make more money point of view, or I want to show whoever is above me, the board or whatever, that I'm great at what I do, it's still, connected to your core business and find ways, rethink, again, this back to the innovation. How could you, through your business, solve meaningful problems for yourself and or your clients in a way that also has an impact on the world? And then pursue that and, make that really, really great.
I think the greenwashing part is a really interesting point as well, because so many people these days, they think that if you're doing something for sustainability or climate change or however you want to frame it, that you're just doing it for marketing. Where I just think it's incredible the way you frame it is that we should be looking at this. If a CEO's got a number of problems they want to solve, they should be able to go to marketing, sustainability, finance, and they can all bring profit-driving benefits. And I think that's the only way we can get over this problem.
Yeah.
Like for us now, as soon as you started reframing it, I was thinking, well, what can we do that's a sustainable option that doesn't add any cost to the business, in fact, improves profitability? Do you have any tips or things that we should be looking at as business owners listening to this podcast going, you can look at this now and it will be more sustainable for your business and it will make you more money?
The key thing here is always to think about what could we do to start changing the core of what it is we do, whatever that is, right? Not saying do everything different from tomorrow, but make sure that that's sort of the path you're on. Obviously, you got to take the steps that are in the right size and frequency and all of that. So that's where the more tactical part comes in. What do we do in what order and how big steps are we ready to take and all of that. But it depends a bit if you're a service-based business or a product-based business and the kind of cost structure and everything you have. But again, it's looking back to, as I say, just ask that simple question. What's the top 5 problems we have and ideal clients or groups of clients if you have different ideal markets? And then just look at those, right? But it's really about asking different questions, right? So what could we do to solve this? And you might need somebody with the insight, you most likely do, into sustainability to be able to connect the dots. The problem is that most people, as I said, in the sustainability community don't really get it, right? So somebody needs to be able to build the bridge, to translate, which is why, for instance, I often work with business leaders to help them get it, right? Because then they can ask the right kind of questions, and then you can get the more technical people to come up with solutions. Because they can, I believe, basically, most questions we ask for solutions, we are capable of developing. But right now we are asking crappy questions, sorry to say, which means we get crappy solutions, right? So if we ask better questions that has a better impact on the world and is better for the world, well then we could change a lot of things. But it really comes down to that sort of analysis about what are the problems that we're facing right now, and what could we do differently? How could we solve problems in a more elegant way, a way that also has an impact on the world, right?
How can we integrate sustainability into our profit and growth strategies?
Yes.
So ultimately, we're trying to make businesses that stand the test of time, and to stand the test of time, they have to look after the planet and the future generations to which we live. So if you were going to look at what businesses can do today to help our kids tomorrow, is there anything you could say so people listen to go, this is what I would be thinking about? Because I think the communication piece is massively important to reframe that, and then to go, this is something you should look at straight away.
I think the hard part of that question is that it is all contextual, obviously.
Massively.
So what works for you doesn't necessarily work for somebody else or your neighbor next door. But it always, again, comes down to looking at your core thing, right? Whatever that is, right? So sometimes, for instance, let's just say a pure service-based company, like an accountant, right? Or a lawyer or something, right? Where there is it's very, very little energy use or paper use or whatever, right? It's really not a lot, right? But again, if you're thinking about this, what's the core that we do? Well, they offer accounting service or legal advice. So what's that position? Well, we actually speak to very typically the top part of the organization within our clients. Well, for them, it will probably be, how do we kickstart their journey, right? So looking at the numbers, if you're the accountant, saying, are you aware that you use X millions on these raw materials? And what if, isn't that a kind of like a big post? And what would happen if you could reduce that by 20%? That would do this to your profit results. Have you thought about a smarter way of utilizing these resources or increase the longevity of the product and thereby the value of it? So they have all the numbers, so they can actually just start looking at it and say, have you ever wondered about? Because the thing is that for most, this is just kind of like an embedded cost of doing business. That's what you've been told, right? In if you go into a business education, you can't create it can't create a product without buying resources, and obviously that needs to, and as well, resources and labor and all that. You just got to minimize it, but you got to have it. You can't do without, right? So that's about as far as they get. So pinpointing and helping them to see the opportunity space to get them curious and get them started. So I kind of like saying that's the fire starters, right? Their role is to be fire starters, not to find the solution, but enough to get them curious and get started, and they'll go elsewhere to find the actual solutions, right? So that's if you're a service-based company, right?
But I think that is a really, really interesting point. It's creating, and I hope this podcast has done it, creating curiosity around how we can improve our businesses without adding costs to help a wider mission or to create a better planet for future generations. Jasper, it's been a really interesting conversation. Scary in some points, but I think it needs to be scary, and I think we need to be pushing forward. So thank you so much for your time.
It was a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Tusind tak.
Det var en fornøjelse.
If you like these episodes, feel free to subscribe to our Healthy Hustle newsletter below, where you'll get behind-the-scenes information from our guests, as well as from the studio operator who helps us create these cinematic episodes. It's also full of business advice and tips, and it will help you join the community of healthy entrepreneurs.